So again, we come back to the hot topic of matchmaking. I still think that matchmaking should be included for the raid. I made an entire video on that, and my stance has not changed at all. But that doesn't mean, at least in my experience, that the raid has been a huge success despite not having it. What's up you guys, Gong Rong Zong here. Before I share why I feel that the raid has been a success, it's still pretty important that we address the matchmaking part first, because they are organically tied together. Straight off, I just want to share that I have friends that have already downed up to the third boss with pug groups. And by pug groups and matchmaking in general, I'm referring to groups that have 8 people that were complete strangers before grouping up. And while these examples are probably outliers, an exception to the norm, it does at least prove that it can work for the very rare exception. But for the vast majority, and by vast majority, I really mean vast majority, 99.9% of people that are going to try to pug, unfortunately, I don't think it's ever going to work well. And here's why. The raid was designed around cooperation and communication. It's extremely clear to me that the devs designed the raid around an absolute need to communicate and cooperate. This raid is not 8 individuals doing their own independent thing. There is a great deal of emphasis on the need to talk to each other constantly. Everyone has to be on the same wavelength, switching targets and doing objectives when called for immediately on the fly. In fact, there is even a fight where at later stages, you have to switch back and forth between targets literally every 2 seconds. There needs to be a leader or a couple of people calling out the shots. For example, on the first and second boss fights, there will be multiple situations where the group will have to switch to and focus down the ads before changing back to the boss. There are also fights where many other group members have to chime in with their own cues and observations, such as for the control panels on the second and third bosses. There were barely any periods of silence during the encounters, due to the sheer amount of things that needed to be called out. The actual mechanics themselves aren't terribly complicated. Our raid group has been able to figure out the mechanics all on our own for the first 3 bosses, without reading any guides at all, and I suspect many others were able to do the same. And while the encounters do require a pretty high level of skill, like you can't have a player who only has 10% accuracy rate doing it, it's not anything absurdly high. If we think about it in terms of WoW, it's not like Mythic raiding where you need to be in the top 1% of the DPS populace. It has Mythic level raiding of mechanics, but numbers wise it's a lot more forgiving. It's why we now have sub 30-minute speedruns for top tier groups that have gotten their execution nailed down. But most importantly, I feel that the raid is a huge success because it achieved exactly what it set out to do. Because it was specifically designed as a very difficult challenge to take on as an organized group, it was able to facilitate a huge amount of bonding between fellow raiders. And I really want to heavily emphasize this point. Just these few days of raiding has done so much more in terms of relationship building than any other activity in the game since launch. And in fact, more than many other multiplayer games. There is a huge amount of planning in terms of strategies, discussions about how to tweak each other's builds, hours spent talking with each other before and after the raid about how we could improve on the mechanics. It involves everyone. Everyone chimes in during the raid out of necessity of the mechanics. You aren't just one of another nondescript DPS in a huge group who's forgettable and opinion doesn't matter. And it's just practically impossible to replicate these experiences in a pug group, unless the stars align and all 8 members somehow clicked instantly and are willing to form a static group for weeks to come. Already in these few days, it has given us an unforgettable positive experience. And these experiences are the ultimate goal of what developers should be going for when creating content for their players. Any game that has ever been legendary has always provided a deeper emotional experience. It's easy to create an incredibly tough boss that takes a high amount of damage to defeat. That's just number tweaking. But it's another thing altogether to create the experiences that a game like Dark Souls, for example, has made for us. The bosses there aren't just some DPS check. They require you to sit back, analyze where you went wrong, and try again and again against seemingly impossible odds until you succeed. It's akin to something like an outward bound program in real life, where you go through a tough but guided experience, making lifelong friends along the way. An experience that you do together with others that has obstacles along the way for you to tackle together, but that you eventually overcome and succeed at together. These experiences are very, very rare nowadays because game developers try to pander to every single type of player and personality, almost always resulting in a subpar experience for all. Developers nowadays are afraid to say no to any part of the player base. But that's the thing. If you try to please everyone, you will end up pleasing no one. And the devs ended up making a hard choice to exclude a segment of the player base in order to include another. And that is why I am happy. Not because the raid didn't include matchmaking, but because it wasn't designed around it. It was designed to test you, and in that process, help you to make new friends and become a better Division 2 player overall. It's one of the lesser said but understood things about classic WoW, and why it has so much hype around it 15 years later after its first launch. People want to communicate and have a social experience with other players again, and not just pop in and out of a dungeon or raid, not needing to say a single word at all. People want difficult content that challenges the group, that makes them sit up and crack their heads together to solve a problem or overcome an obstacle. And people want to have real experiences with other players, making friendships along the way. Those are extremely important aspects in any multiplayer game that many developers gloss over, resulting in epic boss fight encounters that have no real lasting impact and are forgotten within merely a week. That being said, would the raid be better off with matchmaking? I still think so, but only in a very minor way, in that it would simply serve as a more convenient avenue for you to be able to find other people. It will enhance your accessibility, but not your experience of the raid. So this choice should be given to players, but it's important to be very, very aware that only out of sheer luck will you be in the 1% that encounters 7 other strangers that can deliver a positive experience for you. There's a reason why in most MMOs, most people don't even want to touch the LFG option with a 10-yard pole. I agree with the devs on this part, in how it would likely be a toxic experience at worst and a frustrating one at best. In all honesty, if the raid was launched with matchmaking, this video's title won't be why the raid is a huge success despite matchmaking. It'll be why the raid is a huge success in spite of it. It would almost be for certain that there will be another complete shit show of how the raid needs to be nerfed, people still quitting the game in droves because there is essentially no endgame due to the raid being too hard, and that the devs aren't thinking of solo players anyway because the raid wasn't ever designed for them. Every other piece of content in the game was designed with matchmaking in mind. I think the raids shouldn't be. Feel free to include it as an option, but the devs shouldn't compromise on its unique experience by designing around it. And also, I think this is pretty important. A lot of people are chiming in that the raids are what is going to cause a huge drop-off of players and result in the death of the game. And I would just like to address this. While I agree that the difficulty of the raid and its no matchmaking aspect might cause a drop-off of some players, I disagree that the raid should be the one taking the blame for the sharp decrease in the player base since launch. The player base fell off so hard because of a myriad of other, and what is to me, more important factors, which I've also done another video on. Make sure to check it out if you haven't yet. From broken to clunky skills, to a lackluster dark zone, to a complete lack of build diversity, the raid is just one of many other factors that have been grinding at our patience. Many players are voicing concerns that they want matchmaking because when they log onto their 50-person clan, only 3 members are online at any one time. That has nothing to do with the raid or its design. It's due to the fact that a huge number of people quit because of events that occurred before the raid was released. And even though many players were already in a huge clan, the raid was not enough motivation to bring them back. It has little to do with the lack of matchmaking at all. No matter what type of super cool endgame content Massive pushes out, it doesn't matter if builds are inherently broken, if my class is just not fun to play, or if the skills I want to use are not even viable. These are still the bigger problems, way and above anything about the raid or matchmaking. Design the raid as well as you want. It's still going to result in 8-gun builds with LMGs or ARs because of a complete lack of build diversity. No tanks, no healers, just bullet hell, and maybe the one-off guy with his Seeker Mines. And that is why I believe that the raid has been a success. It achieved what it set out to do. It was meant to appeal to a specific part of the player base and ensure that they achieved a deeper positive experience. I feel like that has been largely fulfilled for those of you that have experienced the raid with your friends or clanmates. The lack of matchmaking is not going to be the cause of the death of this game. Many other factors have unfortunately already done that job all too well. And so even if the raid was launched with matchmaking, my advice would be the same. If you have not experienced the raid yet, I would honestly encourage you to find and join a clan. It doesn't take long, especially now, when lots of clans are still accepting and many people are also searching for clans. There are also so many clans out there searching for casual members to experience the raid with together. And also experienced clans that are willing to accept players that can't play as much. The worst that could happen would be that you don't click with the people there and you can either leave or just find another clan. But the best thing that could happen is that you find a community of like-minded people and make some friends with common interests in the process. Which has happened for me in this game and many other MMOs that I've played over the years. Massive has a whole bunch of issues that it has to fix with this game. But for the raid, I thoroughly enjoyed all of the encounters, and I hope you do too.